Welcome to Contemporary Black Voices, where we take the most important issues confronting Black America. Our panelists, the lovely Dr. Sharon Michael Chadwell, New York Times bestselling author Caleb Alexander, and the writer Frederick Williams. I'm Chris Dawkins, and I'll be your host. Today, we discuss a public health approach to violence prevention. A public health approach to eliminate violence does not replace or conflict with law enforcement. Creating a safety for all requires a range of strategies, including the presence of people trained to confront life-threatening violence. The approach focuses on several areas of gun violence: cognitive behavior therapy, survivor support services, changing the ecology of communities affected by gun violence, and violence prevention today. We are joined by Mr. Gerald Givens Jr., who is the president of the Raleigh, former president of the Raleigh NAACP, and the creator of Raleigh Boots on the Ground, whose mission is to break the cycle of violence and build community leaders. We'd love to hear what you think. Please share your comments on YouTube, Black Video News. Please hit the like button and click the bell so that you're notified whenever we have a new show. Welcome, Mr. Givens.
Hey, good morning, and thank you everybody for welcoming me back here to
Just a
Black
second.
Voices Network. I'm so happy to be here again, and I'm glad to see that this great news media platform is still there on the network and still pushing forward. And kudos to you all. Shout out to Carl Booker.
Well, thank you so much. Can you give us a brief history on how Boots on the Ground started and how you think that it will affect or has affected the people in North Carolina?
Well, first of all, gun violence is something that has impacted me my entire life. I've lost 7 family members to gun violence. I've lost my grandfather, my uncle, my brother, and 4 cousins. Most recently, I lost my cousin Israel just in October of 2022. He got access to his father's firearm and accidentally took his life. So this is something that I've had to experience, and it's caused so much pain. And people think that once the shooting is over with, that the pain goes away quickly, but it never does. And so I've had to experience that 7 times. And as we've seen coming out of the pandemic, gun violence has just increased in pretty much every major city in the United States. And I've got together with our community leaders, our universities, different levels of government and business, and we're working together to try to design a model that works for the country.
Can you tell me how the city of Raleigh has embraced what you're doing?
Absolutely. So I went to the Raleigh City Council and I presented to them evidence-based strategies about gun violence prevention. And I asked the city of Raleigh to invest $2 million into laying the foundation in gun violence prevention. And we asked for $1.2 million to go towards gun violence and community violence intervention. And we asked for $800,000 to go towards Office of Violence Prevention. And what ended up happening was we allocated $1.2 million to community violence intervention. Then we allocated $700,000 to an organization called Acorns, which is under the law enforcement agency that deals with street violence intervention. And then at the state level, the state of North Carolina, we work with the Attorney General as well as the governor of North Carolina to create the first Office of Violence Prevention in the entire South.
Wow. Are there any other similar programs around the country?
Yes, there are some great examples right here in North Carolina, my counterpart, Bull City United, which is over in Durham. There are organizations in LA, Philly, Chicago, Orlando, all across the country that are doing this work of building teams of rooted leaders that are credible messengers within the communities that they live in to help reduce the violence in our communities.
I'm going to open it up to our panelists and ask them if they might have any questions for you at this time.
I do have a question. Thanks for being on the show, Mr. Gibbons. Percentage-wise, what has been the effect of the program on reducing gun violence in the community?
Well, right now, what we're focusing on is our target of reaching a goal of reducing gun violence by 30% over the next few years. In the winter of this year, of probably at the end of December, we'll be kicking off something called a hospital violence intervention program with the #1 trauma center here in Wake County, North Carolina, with Wake Med Hospital, which is one of the nation's top trauma centers in the country. And what we'll do is the hospital will take care of everything that deals with the patient inside the hospital, and we'll work with everything outside of the hospital, because sometimes people need that extra helping hand to help them get to the doctor's appointment, to get to the different services that are available within the community that are mental, physical, and spiritual, to help them go on towards a path of healing.
You know, you've talked about this gun violence, and we mentioned at the very beginning that it was a health approach to this. Why do you think that a health approach is appropriate to deal with gun violence?
Well, the data shows us that we're not going to be able to police ourselves out of this situation. No one spends as much money on law enforcement in the world as the United States of America, and yet we continue to have a gun violence problem that is completely different from any other place in the world. They have mental health issues in Japan and England, Australia, and so many other places. So what makes us so different? And what we've realized is that the issue is really access, is being having access to firearms. And then after you get finished with those access, the next issue is, what do you do when you have that firearm in your hand? And what we're finding out is that between homicide, suicide, domestic violence, and just accidental shooting, that if you start breaking things down by race and ethnicity, you start to see that homicide impacts the Black and brown community more. Suicide impacts white Americans more. And then you'll see domestic violence impacts women more. And so once we see all of this data and have all this information, we are able to identify and predict and create solutions to problems that deal with violence.
How do you find people for your program, and what is the ethnic mix of those people in your program?
Oh my gosh. Our chairman of our board, he and his family were shopping at a Target, and they experienced a mass shooting in that Target, and he's a white man. Our secretary, she's Jewish. Her son was at the University of North Carolina, and the mass shooting that took place there, he survived that a couple of years ago in Charlotte. And then our treasurer, when she was at her graduation, she was wearing the ribbon for Virginia Tech shooting, because at the same time that she was graduating, and she's an African American woman, that it was around that time that shooting took place. And then our team, primarily the core of our intervention team, are primarily African American, a mixture of men and women, and they've all experienced some type of violence and trauma within their past, and they're all credible messengers.
You know, Gerald, that really brings me to the Second Amendment. How does that play into how people feel about your program? You being an ex-military man, tell me what you feel and others have felt regarding the Second Amendment? Because when you talk about those other countries and them having health issues regarding gun violence, they don't have the type of issues that we have. And they don't have gun
Exactly.
violence that we have. But we have the gun violence because of that Second Amendment.
You know, Chris, when I'm meeting with elected officials in in our country, I always say, be here with us now. You know, and in 2019, I had the opportunity to take some of the children who survived the Sandy Hook shooting to meet two of the senators here in North Carolina. And I believe that experience with them encouraged them and inspired them to participate in the first federal legislation that was passed to deal with gun violence, the Safer Communities Act, in more than 30 years. What I try to explain to people about the Second Amendment is that the Constitution itself was never perfect. I mean, it gave us slavery. It gave us women didn't have the right to vote. You had property issues. We could go on and on. The Constitution has been amended 27 times to get us to where we are today. And so when we look at the Second Amendment, I always tell everyone to be here with me now. We're not in the 1700s anymore. Back then, when they wrote the Second Amendment, people had muskets, and today people have the AR-15 in our society that's going through cities like Buffalo and Las Vegas and Orlando as the weapon of choice in some of these mass shootings, where sometimes people, as much as 900 people, were injured in one of those shootings. So what I try to tell everybody is the vision that we have at Boots on the Ground. If we can't be safe, it's impossible for us to be free. So we have to look at the Second Amendment and do the same thing that we've done with automobiles when they weren't safe. We made them safer. The same thing with airplanes. We made them safer. We didn't get rid of airplanes. We didn't get rid of automobiles. We just made them safer. And we need to do the exact same thing with firearms.
Thank you. Our time is drawing short, and I wanted to see if Caleb or Fred might have a question.
I did have a question.
Sure.
So, I was just wondering about the some of the preventive elements of some of the things that they're implementing in Raleigh. I was wondering if he could talk a little bit about some
Unfortunately,
of the,
I could barely hear that
elements.
question. If you could ask me that question again, if somebody who can, he said I could barely hear his mic.
Oh, ask them about some of the preventive elements that they have put in place to prevent gun violence.
He wanted to know about the preventive elements that help to prevent gun violence.
Say that one more time, unfortunately.
He wanted to know about any preventive items that you deal with to be able to prevent gun violence.
Absolutely. So some of the things that what we're able to do to help reduce it is, first of all, is being able to sit down with young people first, and first to get them to understand how to slow down. With adults, it's more so helping them to make better choices with those firearms. For an example, here in our community, more than 300 firearms were stolen out of people's vehicles last year in our community. So now we have a campaign at the local, county, and state level to encourage people to take their firearms out of their vehicles so those firearms won't be stolen. With the clergy members inside of our community, we work with them to help design programs, and we're looking right now with one of our clergy leaders. We're building a new facility called Inspiration Campus, and that will help us to be able to provide some additional services that are needed inside of our community. So it's about, it's a whole community, whole person concept approach to being able to deal with violence as part of the solutions. There isn't a one tool or one program or either one organization that's going to be able to solve this. This is something that involves each and every single one of us, because if we can't be safe while going to the grocery store, if we can't be safe while going to the bowling alley, if we can't be safe, while sitting in a church, we can't be free.
Gerald, I'd like to thank you very much for being with us today. The information was very helpful. The next time you're in San Antonio, talk to Councilman John Courage. He had a buyback gun program, and I think they would be very much interested in the program that you have. Also, any other people around the country, I think, might be interested in your program. So thank you so much, and we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.